Leonard had always lived a life where everything came easily to him. He grew up in a large house surrounded by fine things, and rarely heard the word no. His parents were wealthy business owners who traveled often, buying expensive art pieces and hosting parties that filled their home with music, laughter, and shining lights. From a young age, Leonard believed the world was a place made for his comfort. It was not that he was a bad person at heart, but he had never been taught the value of humility or patience. When something did not go his way, he was used to simply paying to change it. As an adult, Leonard continued living this way. He traveled to beautiful vacation destinations, stayed in hotels with tall glass windows overlooking oceans or shining cities, and moved through life as if every door should open the moment he approached. People sometimes admired him for his confidence, while others quietly stepped aside when he appeared. He did not notice how others felt around him because he had never needed to. One summer, Leonard took a trip to a country rich with history and tradition. The land was known for its ancient monuments, old stone paths, and stories of bravery that had shaped generations. One of the most treasured places in this country was the National Tomb, a site built to honor those who had served and protected the nation. Visitors from around the world came to show respect, to learn, and to feel the quiet power of the place. The National Tomb was guarded every hour of every day by trained soldiers. The guard on duty did not speak, move casually, or break attention. Every step and turn was performed with deep meaning. The ceremony itself reminded visitors that this was not just a tourist attraction. It was sacred. It was a place where people came to remember lives that had shaped the future. On the day Leonard decided to visit the tomb, the sun was warm, and a gentle breeze moved across the open space. Visitors gathered quietly, some with cameras hanging loosely at their sides, others with guides explaining the history in soft tones. Children held their parents' hands, sensing the seriousness of the place. Standing at the center of the ceremonial path was Sergeant Malik. He had served many years in the military and carried himself with calm strength. He was not loud, nor did he need to be. His silence spoke for him. His uniform was clean and perfectly arranged. His posture was upright and steady, showing respect not just to the place but to the memories held there. Malik was deeply connected to the tomb. Some of the names carved into the stone walls belonged to people he had known personally. Friends, mentors, people who had once laughed with him, trained with him, and shared thoughts about life under starry night skies. To him, guarding the tomb was not just a duty. It was a way of honoring those who could no longer stand beside him. Every hour he spent there was a silent promise that they would not be forgotten. Visitors often noticed something special in Malik. They could not always describe it, but they felt it. A quiet respect, a gentle seriousness, a sense of peace mixed with strong devotion. Children often looked up at him with wide eyes, amazed by how still and focused one person could be. Adults sometimes felt emotional just watching him, reminded that respect, discipline, and memory were powerful forces. Leonard arrived with a tour group. He wore stylish clothing and expensive sunglasses, and he walked with a confident stride. His guide began explaining the importance of the place, but Leonard only half listened. He was more focused on taking pictures, adjusting his camera, checking the reflection of his sunglasses, and looking around for the best angle. To him, the tomb was another place to see, to photograph, and to move on from. As the group approached the ceremonial area, they saw people quietly lining up behind a rope boundary that marked the section where no visitor was allowed to cross. The ceremony had already begun. Malik stood on guard, steady and unmoving, his gaze straight ahead. The air was calm, the atmosphere respectful. Leonard, however, grew impatient. He did not like waiting, especially when he could not see the best viewpoint. He asked the guide when they could get closer. The guide, in a gentle tone, explained that all visitors needed to wait, observe, and respect the process. Leonard sighed loudly, drawing the attention of several people around him. Some shook their heads slightly, recognizing his impatience. "Why is everyone just standing here?" Leonard asked, not lowering his voice. The guide again tried to explain that this was not a performance but a ceremony meant to honor history. Leonard shrugged, uninterested. To him it seemed unnecessary to stand quietly for so long. He believed he should be able to walk wherever he wished, since he was only there to see the monument and then move on with his day. He stepped closer to the boundary rope. The guide politely reminded him to stay behind it. Leonard offered a brief nod, but his attention was already elsewhere. His eyes were fixed on the guarded inner area. He wanted a better view, a closer picture. He wanted something to post that would impress people back home. Malik did not react to Leonard's presence. He continued his ceremonial position, steady and focused as he always did. His job was not to respond to tourists' moods, but to maintain the dignity of the watch. The crowd felt the contrast clearly. On one side stood Malik, motionless, representing honor, memory, and calm strength. On the other stood Leonard, moving constantly, restless and unaware of the deeper meaning of the moment. A soft hush spread among the visitors. No one wanted to speak too loudly, as if every sound carried weight here. Those who understood the history felt something in the air, something respectful, solemn, and meaningful. Leonard, however, did not feel this atmosphere. He only felt that time was being wasted. He sighed again, louder this time, and muttered to himself about how people were making too big a deal out of this. Some nearby visitors glanced at each other. They did not wish to confront him, but they also could not ignore his lack of respect. One older woman gently placed her hand over her heart, looking toward Malik with quiet admiration. A father whispered to his young son about the importance of honoring the sacrifices of others. A teacher pointed out how still and disciplined the guard stood. These small moments of understanding moved gently through the crowd, like a quiet wave. People were reflecting, learning, appreciating. The tomb had that effect on those who paused to feel it. Leonard had not yet noticed what the others were feeling. He was still wrapped in his own world. But the day was not finished. What would happen next would change his understanding in a way he had never expected. The tomb was not just a place of history. It was a place of awakening, a place where the heart could learn something the mind had never considered. And soon, Leonard was about to learn something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. In a small town known for its ancient historical tombs, tourists came from far and wide to witness the beauty and mystery of the old mausoleum. Among these visitors was a wealthy man named Thomas. He had always traveled to exotic places, taking pride in his status and wealth. With expensive clothes, the latest gadgets, and a sense of entitlement, Thomas believed that the world should always bend to his desires. On a bright sunny morning, Thomas arrived at the famous tomb. The guide, a middle-aged man with deep knowledge of the history, welcomed him and a few other visitors. As they walked through the grand entrance, they were met by the tomb's main guard, an elderly man named Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee had served as a protector of the tomb for decades, treating it with immense respect. He knew every stone, every passage, and the legends tied to the place. Thomas, however, did not share the same respect. He looked around carelessly, taking selfies and making loud comments about the old structures. When Mr. Lee reminded the visitors to avoid touching the walls and to walk slowly, Thomas rolled his eyes. He felt that rules were meant to be ignored, especially by someone as important as himself. At one point, Thomas reached the central chamber of the tomb. Here, the guard stood with a solemn expression, ensuring visitors maintained decorum. Thomas, feeling bored and impatient, made a shocking gesture. In an impulsive act of arrogance, he spat on Mr. Lee's face. The guard was stunned, his eyes widening with disbelief. The crowd around them gasped. Some visitors tried to intervene, but Thomas waved them away, laughing as if it were a joke. Mr. Lee, however, did not respond with anger. Instead, he calmly wiped his face and took a step back, maintaining his composure. His calmness confused Thomas, who had expected a fierce reaction. After a moment of silence, Mr. Lee spoke, his voice low but firm. He reminded Thomas that the tomb was not just a place of stone and history, but a resting place for those who had long passed. He spoke about respect, dignity, and the importance of honoring the past. Thomas barely listened, thinking the guard was overreacting to a minor incident. The guide suggested they continue the tour, trying to diffuse the tension. Thomas, however, wanted to explore the tomb alone. Ignoring the rules, he wandered off into areas where tourists were not allowed. The corridors were narrow, decorated with intricate carvings and symbols. Every step echoed against the stone walls, making the place feel alive with history. As Thomas moved deeper into the tomb, he began to feel an unusual sense of unease. The air seemed heavier and shadows played tricks on his eyes. He shook it off, blaming it on his imagination. Yet in the distance he noticed Mr. Lee watching him silently, The guard's calm gaze seemed almost knowing, as if he understood more than Thomas could see. Thomas's attitude began to shift slightly. He had always considered himself fearless, but the tomb had a mysterious aura that even his wealth could not command. He paused to take a closer look at a mural depicting an ancient ceremony. Suddenly, a small stone fell from above, narrowly missing his foot. Startled, he looked around, realizing that the tomb demanded caution, not recklessness. Meanwhile, Mr. Lee followed quietly, keeping a safe distance. He did not scold Thomas, but his presence reminded the tourist that rules existed for a reason. As Thomas continued exploring, he noticed faint footprints on the dusty floor. Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to follow them. The footprints led him to a hidden chamber that few visitors had ever seen. The room was filled with artifacts, old manuscripts, and relics carefully preserved over centuries. Thomas's eyes widened with amazement. Despite his arrogance, he could not deny the beauty and importance of what he was seeing. At that moment, Thomas realized that the tomb was more than a tourist attraction. It was a living connection to history, a place where people had dedicated their lives to preservation. Mr. Lee entered the chamber quietly, standing beside Thomas without saying a word. The tourist, for the first time, felt the weight of the guard's presence not as an obstacle but as a protector of something priceless. The silence in the chamber was profound. Thomas wanted to speak, to explain his earlier behavior, but the right words did not come. He felt small, almost embarrassed by his own arrogance. Mr. Lee looked at him, and though he said nothing, Thomas could sense a silent message. Respect is earned, not demanded. By the end of the visit, Thomas had explored every corner of the tomb. The experience was humbling. He realized that wealth and status could not replace understanding, respect, or the wisdom carried by those who dedicated their lives to history. As they exited the tomb, Thomas walked beside Mr. Lee, his posture and attitude different from when he had entered. Something had shifted within him, quietly but surely. Part 2. Expanded. 1,300 words. After leaving the tomb, Thomas felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, embarrassment, curiosity, and awe all swirled together in his mind. He wanted to admit his wrongdoing, to apologize for spitting on Mr. Lee, but he struggled to find the courage. Instead, he walked quietly, reflecting on everything he had witnessed. The town around the tomb was lively with small shops selling souvenirs and local snacks. Families and tourists mingled, but Thomas hardly noticed. His mind was replaying the moments inside the tomb, the serene expressions on the murals, and the calm presence of Mr. Lee. Each image seemed to carry a lesson, a story of respect and patience that Thomas had never considered. Mr. Lee walked a few steps ahead, not demanding attention, but serving as a quiet reminder of humility. Thomas realized that the guard had chosen not to confront him with anger or punishment. Instead, Mr. Lee had allowed Thomas to witness the consequences of his behavior naturally, through the tomb itself. The guide noticed the change in Thomas and decided to share more stories about the tomb. He spoke of the lives of the ancient rulers, the artisans who built the chambers, and the traditions that had survived through centuries. Thomas listened intently, absorbing details that had previously seemed unimportant. Each story added depth to his understanding of history and respect. As they walked toward the exit, Thomas noticed a small group of children watching the guard. Their eyes were filled with admiration, not fear. They asked Mr. Lee questions about the tomb, about the rituals, and about the artifacts. Mr. Lee answered patiently with a gentle smile. Thomas observed this interaction and realized that true authority came not from wealth or force, but from knowledge, patience, and respect. At that moment, Thomas felt a sudden urge to make amends. He approached Mr. Lee and, with genuine humility, apologized. "I was wrong," he said, his voice sincere. "I showed no respect when I should have. Thank you for your patience and for teaching me a lesson I will not forget." Mr. Lee studied Thomas's face for a moment. Then he nodded. "It takes courage to admit mistakes," he replied quietly. "What matters now is how you move forward, and how you treat others and history in the future." Thomas felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The apology was more than just words. It was a turning point in his understanding of the world. He realized that respect could not be bought or demanded. It had to be earned through actions and humility. Over the next few days, Thomas spent more time exploring the town and learning about its culture. He visited local artisans, listened to elders share stories, and even helped in small preservation projects at the tomb. With each act, he felt a sense of connection to the place and the people. His arrogance slowly gave way to appreciation, and his presence became more about learning than showing off. The locals began to notice the change in Thomas. Shopkeepers smiled more freely when he visited. Children greeted him warmly, and the guide spoke of his transformation with quiet approval. Even Mr. Lee seemed more relaxed around him, offering advice and sharing stories without the tension of their first encounter. One evening, Thomas returned to the tomb alone. The sun was setting, casting golden light on the ancient stones. He walked through the corridors quietly, reflecting on the journey he had experienced. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace and connection, as if he were part of something much larger than himself. Standing in the central chamber, Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He could almost feel the presence of the people who had built the tomb centuries ago. He realized that history was not just about old stones and relics. It was about stories, lessons, and respect that carried through generations. When he opened his eyes, he noticed Mr. Lee entering the chamber quietly, a calm expression on his face. They shared a moment of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that had begun with a foolish act, but ended in growth and awareness. Thomas left the tomb that evening changed. He knew that the lesson he had learned would stay with him forever. Respect, humility, and understanding were far more valuable than wealth or status. And as he walked back to his hotel, he carried not only souvenirs and memories, but also a newfound sense of wisdom that he would share wherever he went. Thomas woke up early the next morning, feeling a sense of anticipation he had never experienced before. It was not excitement for luxury or sightseeing, but a quiet eagerness to continue learning and connecting with the people and history around him. The events of the previous day, the incident in the tomb, the calm guidance of Mr. Lee, and the lessons he had absorbed, had left a deep impression on him. He wanted to honor that experience in every way possible. After a light breakfast, Thomas returned to the town square where the locals gathered to start their day. He saw familiar faces, the shopkeepers who had smiled at him more warmly in recent days, children who waved as he passed, and even the guide who had first shown him the tomb. There was a sense of community here that Thomas had never felt in the big cities he had visited. The connection between people, history, and culture seemed alive, breathing through every street and every stone. Thomas made his way back to the tomb. This time he did not rush or take photos for social media. He walked slowly, carefully observing each detail, appreciating the craftsmanship and care that had gone into building the sacred place. The corridors that had once felt like a maze now seemed like a story unfolding with each step. The carvings on the walls, the inscriptions on the stones, and the faint whispers of history spoke to him in a language he was only beginning to understand. Inside the central chamber, Thomas found Mr. Lee already present, standing quietly near one of the old relics. The guard greeted him with a nod, and Thomas felt a wave of respect and gratitude for the man who had shown him the true meaning of patience and wisdom. Without speaking, Thomas gestured toward the artifacts, indicating that he wanted to learn more. Mr. Lee smiled faintly and began to explain their significance. He told Thomas stories about the people who had built the tomb centuries ago, their dedication to preserving their culture, and the rituals that had been performed to honor those who had passed. Each tale was filled with detail, from the type of stone used to the methods of carving intricate designs. Thomas listened intently, realizing that each small action of the past carried meaning far beyond what he had ever imagined. As the morning passed, Thomas began to ask questions not to show off knowledge, but out of genuine curiosity. He wanted to understand the symbolism of the carvings, the history of the tomb's construction, and the values of the people who had dedicated their lives to preserving it. Mr. Lee answered each question patiently, his voice calm and measured, reinforcing the lesson that knowledge and respect were far more powerful than anger or punishment. After hours of learning, Thomas decided to take a break. He stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling a sense of connection with the environment around him. The town was quiet, the streets lined with stone houses and small markets. Vendors greeted him warmly and children ran past laughing. Thomas felt at peace, a stark contrast to the impatience and arrogance that had characterized him just a few days earlier. He realized that the transformation he had undergone was not just about respecting the tomb or Mr. Lee. It was about how he approached life itself. Patience, humility, and empathy were values he had often ignored in his pursuit of wealth and recognition. Now he understood that true growth came from learning, listening, and acknowledging the experiences of others. As afternoon approached, Thomas returned to the tomb for another visit. This time he carried a small notebook, intending to record the lessons he had learned. He wanted to remember the stories, the emotions, and the moments of realization that had shaped his perspective. Sitting quietly in the central chamber, he wrote down every detail, each word reflecting his growing appreciation for history, culture, and human connection. Mr. Lee observed him from a distance, noting the change in demeanor. There was no arrogance in Thomas now, only a deep, sincere interest in learning and understanding. The guard felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that his silent approach to teaching had worked. Sometimes, he thought, the most powerful lessons are not delivered through punishment or anger, but through example and patience. Later that evening, Thomas joined the guide and a few locals for a small dinner near the town square. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, filled with laughter and shared stories. Thomas listened more than he spoke, absorbing the experiences and perspectives of the people around him. He realized that wealth and status had once been his way of connecting with the world, but now genuine interest, humility, and kindness were far more meaningful. During dinner, a group of children approached Thomas. They had heard about his visit to the tomb and the change in his behavior. Curious and eager, they asked him questions about his life, his travels, and the lessons he had learned. Thomas responded honestly, sharing his experiences and the transformation he had undergone. He spoke about the incident in the tomb, admitting his mistake and explaining how Mr. Lee's patience had taught him a valuable lesson. The children listened with wide eyes, absorbing the story not just as entertainment, but as a lesson themselves. They asked more questions about respect, courage, and humility. Thomas realized that he was not just learning anymore. He was now in a position to pass on knowledge, sharing the wisdom that had been given to him. The thought humbled him deeply, reminding him that growth is continuous and often comes from unexpected places. After dinner, Thomas took a walk through the town. The streets were quiet under the moonlight and the air was cool and refreshing. He reflected on the past few days, the arrogance that had led him to disrespect Mr. Lee, the quiet strength of the guard, and the profound lessons he had absorbed. Each step he took felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of his past behavior had been lifted. Returning to the tomb one last time before leaving the town, Thomas stood at the entrance and looked back at the corridors he had walked through. He felt gratitude for every stone, every carving, and every lesson learned. Mr. Lee approached him, and this time Thomas did not need to speak. They shared a silent understanding, a mutual recognition of respect and growth. As Thomas left the town the next morning, he carried with him more than souvenirs and photographs. He carried lessons that would shape the way he lived, traveled, and interacted with others. The tomb, the town, and the quiet wisdom of Mr. Lee had left an imprint on his soul. He knew that he would never forget the experience and that it would continue to guide him in ways he could not yet fully understand. Years later, Thomas would often reflect on that journey. Whenever he visited new places, he remembered the calm strength of Mr. Lee, the beauty of the tomb, and the lessons of respect and humility. He shared these stories with friends, family, and even strangers, inspiring them to approach life with patience, curiosity, and kindness. The incident that had started with arrogance and disrespect had transformed into a story of growth, learning, and lasting change. What happened in that small town by the ancient tomb became not just an unforgettable experience, but a turning point that shaped the life of a man who had once believed that wealth and status were everything. Now he understood that true richness came from the heart, the mind, and the willingness to learn from every moment.